Here with reaction to all this, Freedom Caucus member, Ohio Republican, former president of the Freedom Caucus. Well, that would destroy your career in 5 minutes. And Sara Carter, investigative reporter, Fox News contributor. Thank you both for being with us. All right,
You bet, John.
I look at the Schiff reply as a disaster for the Democrats for some of the reasons I just mentioned. Your take, Congressman.
No, you're exactly right. Schiff tried to say that, look, it wasn't really the dossier. It was the FBI was looking at Carter Page ahead of time, and they were investigating. They were looking into all this. Well, if that's the case, then why did you wait for the dossier before you went to the FISA court? If it was just based on everything else you were doing, why didn't you go to the FISA court before that? Why did you wait? Why did you lead with the dossier on the FISA application? And why didn't you tell the court who paid for the dossier, who was paying Steele to produce this document? So I agree with you. I thought this was, we couldn't talk about it till it came out, but I thought this thing was a complete dud and only reinforces what you've been saying, Sean, what Sarah's been reporting, and what we've been saying in the Nunes memo from a few weeks ago.
And Sara, you wrote a column. Now the Republicans refute point by point the Democratic memo on the dossier, and I thought they made a pretty powerful case. And again, we go back to the major revelation here is that, this was supposedly to challenge the credibility of the Nunes memo when just the opposite happened, because it was the Grassley-Graham memo said the bulk of information was from the Steele dossier. That still remains true today, and it was key to the FISA warrant application. They didn't address the whole issue of Andrew McCabe and the fact that in his statement that no dossier, there would be no application for a FISA warrant, which they said they were going to address in their memo. And in fact, they did hide that connection that Clinton bought and paid for this thing. And it seems like they relied only on the credibility of Christopher Steele, not on any verified facts before they go to the FISA court.
Oh, absolutely. And if you look at it on its face, the main point in Schiff's argument was just completely, utterly abolished, because he was trying to say that they had warned the FISA court from the get-go. Oh, the FISA court knew what was going on here. They knew from the beginning. But if you look at it, it was this contorted way of explaining that they speculate. Remember that word, speculate. That the FBI speculates there might be political motivation, and they put that in a footnote, and they didn't even address the fact that Hillary Clinton and the DNC paid for this dossier. Had they told the FISA court this, I am certain that a judge at the FISA court would have thrown this out. I mean, and then further, they had already looked into Christopher Steele at this point. They had information that there was extraordinary bias in here. They went forward with it. And as you said, Sean, I mean, they didn't even address McCabe's own statement. And remember, McCabe is knee deep in all of this, if not head deep, in everything that was going on here with this investigation. And now he is being investigated by the Inspector General for his role actually in the Clinton email server, and he's being investigated as well by others for potentially obstructing justice. So there is a lot here, and for Schiff, unfortunately, this memo did nothing for them, but just, in fact, it boomeranged back on them.
All right, but let's go to the actual memo of Schiff, where he says that, in fact, the DOJ and the FBI would have been remiss in their duty to protect the country had they not sought a FISA warrant and repeated renewals to conduct temporary surveillance on Carter Page, someone the FBI assessed to be an agent of the Russian government, and the DOJ met the rigor, transparency, and evidentiary basis needed to meet FISA's cause requirement. But that's not true, is it, Congressman?
I don't think so at all, Sean, because, again, why did they wait until they had the dossier to go to the court? If it was all about Carter Page and evidence you collected on Page, go to the court ahead of time if you want to surveil him. But no, they waited for this disproven, salacious, unverified dossier. They took it to the court. And then they try to also have it both ways. They try to say, well, it wasn't really the most important thing. But, oh, by the way, we did say it was political in nature. When you read how they describe the political nature of the dossier, it is truly the most convoluted language I have ever seen. And anyone with any common sense reads that and say, what are they trying to say? And why didn't they just say it? Why didn't you just say the Clinton campaign paid for this? Clinton for America and the DNC paid for this. Why didn't you just say it? So they're all over the map. And I even heard Congressman Schiff on TV this Sunday, Sean, where he said, well, Steele didn't know who was financing the dossier, who was behind paying him. Well, first of all, I find that hard to believe. But even if that's accurate, who cares? The FBI knew, and why didn't they make it plain to the judge who sat at that FISA court, this secret court, and granted a warrant to spy on a fellow American citizen associated with the Trump campaign?
So now we can conclude the following, that the FBI and DOJ used political dirt bought and paid for by the Democratic Party, the DNC, and the Hillary Clinton campaign to spy on an American citizen from the Republican Party to get access to an opposition party candidate's information. And by the way, that also allows them to look at everything prior to the warrant. And we also learned that they lied to a FISA judge, purposely misled this judge, and withheld the information about who bought and paid for it. Now, but the DOJ and the FBI knew, and that to me is critical, Sarah Carter.
Yeah. Oh, it is critical. And let's just go back to Carter Page for one moment. Carter Page has asked, and I spoke with him this weekend, yeah,
he's on TV with me tonight, by the way, as you are, but I mean, what did you ask him this weekend?
He's saying, look, let it all out. This is a smear campaign. Get out all of my FISA get all these FISA applications out in the public. Let's make this public. Let's settle this once and for all. He adamantly denies, over and over again, being any kind of tool for the Russian government. There still has not been proof of that, obviously, because he has not been arrested. We haven't seen any of that happen. And look, if it would have been Papadopoulos that started off this investigation, George Papadopoulos, as they tried to assert later, after all of this took place, they wouldn't have had to rely so heavily on this dossier. And obviously Papadopoulos wasn't as big of a concern to them because they would have gotten a FISA application from the courts. I mean, they would have been able to spy on Papadopoulos instead of Carter Page. So there's a lot of inconsistencies here with what the FBI, and remember, the FBI has been criticized before by the FISA courts. And I think now this is going to open up a whole new realm of investigations because we have to really ask ourselves some serious questions here and about our Fourth Amendment protections. Because once we see this, I say to myself, well, what else has been going on there? I mean, we only know this because this story has been so explosive and it's unraveled. But have there been other applications that they've been less truthful on? And that's something that I'm very interested in.
All right, we're going to go through this slowly because what Devin Nunes and the Republicans did is they literally refuted the Schiff memo point by point, and I just think they blew it out of the water. And I think now we can say that the things that we've been telling our audience have been factual, accurate, and true, which means what's going to happen next and what should happen next. All right, short segment here as we continue with Congressman Jim Jordan and Sara Carter. We're going to carry them over into the next half hour. But I think with the main thing we've got to look at now that Schiff has released the memo, I think, why did Schiff even want this release considering it backfires? I mean, for example, they made such a big deal about Andrew McCabe, Congressman, testifying in December that the FISA warrant wouldn't have been even sought without the dossier. They didn't.
Yeah, Andrew. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And they don't even address that really in their memo. They don't refute it. They just say, well, no, it really didn't happen. Well, then why didn't you cite something in this memo to refute that fundamental point? Because Andrew McCabe, deputy director of the FBI, said, but for the dossier, we wouldn't have been able to secure the warrant, which confirms what I just said earlier, which is that's probably why the FBI waited till they had the dossier to go to the court. So it refutes Schiff's main point, which is, they were investigating Steele. We were looking at Steele long before the dossier was complete and before the FBI had access to it. Well, then why did you wait?
How can they have an entire, not a single reference in the Schiff memo to the DNC or the Clinton campaign and who funded it? Not one reference at all, Sarah Carter.
Well, yeah, because it backfires on them, right? I mean, if they put that in there, it unravels their entire weak argument on why, against Nunes. So they can't put it in there. And it was really interesting. Andrew McCarthy wrote a phenomenal piece on this, and he brings that up. And, Schiff tries to explain that it would be like unmasking, and one has nothing to do with the other. I mean, this is a Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign paid through Perkins Coie to have this basically British ex-spy work on a report, a dossier, an anti-Trump dossier focused on Russia. He's collecting salacious and unverified information, putting it into this dossier. They're shopping it around to the FBI, and then they're shopping it around to the media. And remember this, Sean, they also, now we have information that verifies this, you have Christopher Steele in contact with very close allies of Hillary Clinton's campaign. And I think this is something that really needs to be investigated thoroughly, because he's on the phone with people like Cody Shear, who worked for Bill Clinton, and, Sidney Blumenthal, who's a very close ally of Hillary Clinton, who was communicating with her back and forth while she was at State Department on issues like Libya and other issues. And they're passing information back and forth to each other. So it's very difficult for me to believe, it could be, but that, Sidney Blumenthal...
Stay right there. We'll pick it up, and when we come back, what we're going to do is we'll take this Schiff memo, and the House Intelligence Committee literally goes line by line and rips it apart. We'll have full coverage of all of this tonight on Hannity on the Fox News Channel. We'll take a quick break, and by the way, Carter Page will be on tonight. Devin Nunes will be on tonight. Sarah Carter and others, 9 Eastern on the Fox News Channel. Will continue.
Breaking news straight from the source. This is the Sean Hannity Show.
All right, 25 till the top of the hour, 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of the program. Anyway, so the Schiff memo comes out on Saturday. We had been getting word Friday that it might come out late Friday. That never happened. It ignores completely the fact that the DNC, the Hillary campaign, bought and paid for that dossier, which, as the Grassley-Graham memo pointed out, became the bulk of the FISA application. But, of course, they never told the judge any of this. The Democratic memo doesn't have a single reference to the DNC or the Clinton campaign in a significant portion of the Carter Page FISA application, and the Democratic memo doesn't contain a single reference to them paying for this at all, which means that they lied or purposely misinformed the FISA court judge. And it also confirmed that the September 2016 Yahoo News piece article by Michael Isikoff was part of the FISA application, but they ignore the fact that that information came directly from Steele, so it was really still one source, not two. But they tried to deceive the FISA court in that way as well. So anyway, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence put out a response memo to the Schiff memo, and they go line by line refuting what Schiff's memo says. And I want to go through this as we continue with Sarah Carter and Congressman Jim Jordan. The first charge is that Christopher Steele's raw intelligence reporting did not inform the FBI's decision to initiate their counterintelligence investigation in late 2016. Congressman, you've seen the House committee reaction to it. What's yours?
Yeah, I mean, come on. Again, I keep coming back to this point. If that's the case, then why even take the dossier to the court at all? If you're not relying on Christopher Steele and what he put in that document, then why'd you take that to the court? And frankly, as people who have actually seen the application have said, why did you lead with it? Normally when you're making an argument to a court, you lead with your best argument. They led with the dossier. So to say that somehow this was not the key makes absolute no sense. And to the fundamental point, think about it. You go into a court of law and you don't tell, and you're using a document to secure a warrant to spy on a fellow citizen, to go after to infringe on their Fourth Amendment liberties, and you don't tell the court that an opposition campaign finance that report, you don't disclose that fundamental piece of information, that key fact. That's what they did. And that is what is so wrong with this and why it has to be investigated, and frankly, why we need a second special counsel.
And going to point two, Sarah Carter. Now, the Grassley-Graham memo that came out, they confirmed that the bulk of the FISA application consisted of allegations against Page that were disclosed to the FBI by who? Christopher Steele. And that dossier was not verified. And yet the Democrats in their response say the Page FISA application made only narrow use of information from Steele's sources. That's just factually not true.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they omit information that's critical about Steele. I mean, and they omit information that's critical about Carter Page. In the entire application, for example, in one instance, they actually have this taped statement that was reproduced in 2015. It was a federal court filing where a Russian intelligence officer literally calls Page an idiot. I mean, and they don't even explain that. They don't put that in there. I mean, they don't even address this. And I mean, it's like there is no evidence suggesting that Carter Page, and that's what the Russians said. I'm not saying that about Mr. Page whatsoever, but they don't address anything that proves that Carter Page, and remember, they have to have proof. You have to be able to deliver proof to the courts, Sean, that this person is a threat to national security because you are actively spying on a U.S. person.
But what do we know about Carter Page? We know that he'd been investigated fully, cooperated with the FBI at every level, right?
Absolutely, and that's all we know, that he cooperated with the FBI, that there is no evidence to suggest that he is at all an active spy for the Russians in any way, shape, or form. And according to this particular FISA application on Page, which was renewed over and over again, there is no evidence to suggest that at all. They relied on a dossier with salacious arguments.
And they used it 4 times.
Even by them.
And not one of the 4 times, the initial application and the 3 subsequent renewals, they never told the court the truth.
Absolutely. They never once told the courts the truth. They never mentioned Perkins Coie. They never explained who Perkins Coie was. That's the law firm. They never explained that Hillary Clinton and the DNC were paying for this, funded this. And remember, even more importantly, too, is that Glenn Simpson never even verified the information in the dossier himself. Mm-hmm. They were putting this stuff together piece by piece, and nobody had verified any of it. And it was pretty evident since Comey himself was the one that came up with the statement that it was an unverified and salacious dossier, even when he briefed President Obama then and then President-elect Trump.
Let's go to the other charge that's made in the Schiff memo, that the information about George Papadopoulos was received against the backdrop of Russia's aggressive covert campaign to influence our elections, which the FBI was already monitoring. And they responded by saying Russia's aggressive meddling in the 2016 election, which the GOP memo does not dispute, is the key focus of the committee's ongoing Russia investigation. But the point is, if you're ever going before any if you're ever trying to use hearsay in a courtroom, it's usually not admitted. This is 4 times hearsay as it relates to Papadopoulos, is it not, Congressman?
Yeah, it sure seems that way. And remember, when the investigation was open with the Papadopoulos information, that was in late July of 2016. And guess who the agent was who opened the case? Peter Strzok. So the same Peter Strzok who ran the Clinton investigation, the same Peter Strzok who interviewed Mills, Abedin, Clinton, who later interviewed General Flynn, that guy is the one who opens it. And Papadopoulos, and if that was so important, why is that the only time we frankly really heard about Papadopoulos? They used that to open an investigation, and then everything after that turned to Christopher Steele and, more importantly, the dossier, the work product that he produced, that after being paid for by the Clinton campaign.
How can the Democrats claim, as they do in this Schiff response, that the DOJ's FISA warrant application was based on compelling evidence and probable cause of Page's pre-campaign activities, when they failed to explain why, if the evidence of Page's past activities was so compelling, then the Steele dossier, why was that then used for the FISA application?
Yeah, exactly.
As the bulk of information? That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense to me. If it's so compelling, go get the warrant before you have the dossier. Don't take the dossier to the court. If it's so compelling and the dossier is not important, then why did you wait and use the dossier and only use the dossier to go to the court?
But isn't it a crime to purposely mislead a FISA court, especially considering how rigid the rules are to spy on an American citizen? It's
a crime to mislead any court. And the fact that they're doing this in a secret setting, I think, is something that should cause us all concern as Americans when we think about our liberties and specifically our Fourth Amendment rights. So that's something that I think needs to be looked at as we move forward in some reforms and changes to that specific court.
I agree with Congressman Jordan on that, Sean, because there's no one there on the opposite end. Remember, this is being delivered to the courts. The courts are looking at these documents from the FBI. They're relying on the fact that the FBI agents that are bringing it to them are being truthful, being straightforward, that everything presented, because it is such an extensive application, is accurate and fair. But one thing that we have learned over the years investigating these type of matters, and especially with the FISA court, is that there's no real oversight once it gets in there. There's nobody to defend, for example, Carter Page. Had somebody come in and been able to say, Carter Page himself or somebody representing the opposite side said, well, look, this is just not enough. This is hearsay. There's no actual evidence evidence in here. We don't have any taped recordings of Carter Page preparing to do something with the Russians. We don't have any documentation that shows that. This is hearsay based on actually FSB agents and disinformation and a former ex-British spy. There may have been a different outcome here, but because there's no one there to defend the person being monitored, there's no way of checks and balances.
Yeah. All right. So then when they actually claim that the DOJ provided the court with more than sufficient information to understand the political context of Steele's research, that is just a blatant lie.
Yeah, read the paragraph where they cite, the Democrats cite as referencing the fact that there was a political context to the dossier. When you read that, anyone will say, "What the heck does that mean? Why didn't they just plainly state it? Why don't just come out and be honest? The DNC paid for it. The Clinton campaign paid for it. Why not just tell us that?" But they didn't. They used again this convoluted, circuitous route of saying source one, campaign one. You couldn't even follow it, and again, that's not supposed to be how it works.
Sarah?
I'm reading it right now, and it's still the most confusing paragraph you can imagine. I mean, it is true. The source one, that a U.S.-based law firm hired the identified U.S. person to conduct. It's so convoluted, and at the very end it says the FBI speculates that the identified U.S. person was likely, and it just speculates, was likely looking for information that could be used to discredit candidate one's campaign. The end.
And then, here we are. So is there anything that we've been reporting at all that I think we have been proven right more than anything else with the Schiff memo, Sarah, in particular, because, you've been doing the research in all of this. The DOJ explained the FBI's reasonable basis for finding the Steele credible, just saying, well, we've worked with them in the past. They never told the court why they fired the guy, which, he was leaking. And we now know, too, that Steele had a political agenda not unlike Peter Strzok and Lisa Page.
Absolutely, and you think that at some point in those 4 renewals, at some point somebody would say something, and they didn't.
So what happens from here, Congressman? The fact
that angers at this court as well. They did not at one point disclose the truth behind this, and the FBI, of course, we read the past stories. The Soccer Federation, how Steele helped and had sources within the DOJ. Bruce Orr, for example, is one of them, and he was considered reliable by the FBI at that point. But when you just look at Steele's on its face political motivation, he was very frank, even with Bruce Orr, and Bruce Orr admitted it, that he didn't want President Trump in office. And so everything that he did in that dossier, everything that he wrote about that he did not verify, remind you, he did not verify, he even said that himself to the London courts, was done with political intent. So we basically weaponized, and this is according to a number of sources, our FISA courts, our intelligence apparatus, our FBI to go after a U.S. president, a sitting president, and previous to that, a candidate. That should be very frightening, because that really only happens in countries, when we think of it, like Turkey or Pakistan or other nations where the intelligence apparatus and law enforcement apparatus has been kind of abducted by political figures, and that should not happen in the United States.
Sean, and this all started because they didn't present the whole truth. You're supposed to have the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Why didn't they tell the court that they had discontinued their relationship? The FBI discontinued their relationship with Christopher Steele because he broke cardinal rule number 1. When you have a relationship with the FBI and you're an informant, you don't go talk to the press. So they discontinued that relationship, but in the 3 subsequent FISA approvals they got, they didn't tell the court that. Why didn't they tell the court the whole truth? Who paid for the dossier? Why didn't they tell the court the whole truth throughout all 4 of these times they went in front of it to get this warrant to spy on a fellow? That is the fundamental problem, and that is why a second special counsel is needed to look at this entire sordid affair, clear back to the Clinton investigation, all the way up to the Russia-Trump investigation.
I got to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll wrap things up. Congressman Jim Jordan and Sara Carter, I will tell you, this is a level of deception against the American people, and frankly, the Democrats trying to cover all of this up, these nefarious activities. All right, as we continue wrapping things up with Sara Carter and Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, so I want to just go to these final, the DOJ claiming that they never paid for the Steele dossier. Do we not know for a fact that the FBI authorized payments to Steele, and do we know how much? Jim Jordan.
Yeah, here's what we know. They had paid Steele. They had authorized reimbursements. They discontinued those. My understanding is because of that fundamental truth or fundamental principle, I should say, that Christopher Steele violated, namely when he went and talked to the press about his relationship with the FBI. So he was on schedule to get reimbursed for this information, but that was discontinued once he broke that fundamental rule and was talking to the press.
Sarah?
Yes, absolutely. Congressman Jordan is right on the mark there. He was authorized payment by the FBI. He was paid in the beginning, covering his expenses and such. And then that was terminated as soon as he began leaking and giving interviews to Yahoo News, Reuters, and others. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's the other point. I mean, at the end of the day, the GOP memo's reference to Bruce Orr is misleading. No, it's not. Because Bruce Orr, we know his wife Nellie was involved in being paid for by Fusion GPS to build the dossier, and more importantly, he met with Steele both before and after the election, and thirdly, he handed over the dossier that his wife gave him to the FBI. Isn't that all true?
Yep. That's all true. And that was never disclosed to the courts or in any of the FISA applications. And I think that would have also been essential had all of this information been disclosed to the FISA court. Any reasonable judge would have said, okay, get out of here. This is not going to work. I'm turning down this FISA. You bring me some real hard evidence, and we'll go forward. But we're not going to base it on this. And I think they never did.
And I think the most laughable part is that Strzok and Page text messages are irrelevant with the FISA application. No, if they've got a political agenda, tell me, isn't that one of the first things as an FBI agent when you become a special agent, Congressman, that you've got to put all politics aside and work for the good of the country and let the rule of law guide you?
Yeah, personally, you got a political position, but it can't influence your work. It'd be like you can't have the referees for the Super Bowl getting off one of the team's buses when they show up at the stadium. You're not allowed to do that. You can't have that perception out there at all when you're the FBI. So yeah, that's a big problem. And of course, we've seen from these text messages how deep it wasn't a bias; it was an animus against President Trump and people who supported President Trump.
All right, you guys have been amazing on this. We really appreciate your time.